What if I told you that the greatest period of peace and prosperity in human history wasn't an accident? That it was built deliberately by people who had just survived the most destructive wars the world had ever seen? And what if I told you that that system is now under threat, that it is cracking? Right now, as missiles fly over the Ukraine and the Middle East, as global trade fractures and great powers turn inward, we may be watching the collapse of the very world order that made life as we know it possible. This isn't alarmism, this is history, and it's happening in real time. I'm Gary Wayback, and welcome to Wayback Look Back. Like a great many people, you probably found history boring at school, but something has led you here. There are things that we should know, there are things that we should understand, and it's impossible to understand what's happening today without context, without background, without knowing what came before us. History was boring for me too, right up until I studied the causes of the First World War. That made me realise that history is made by regular people making questionable decisions with all sorts of consequences. History came alive for me. I've studied history, economics, politics. I've worked as a tour guide through the cities and battlefields of Europe. And I've been a high school teacher. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just a regular guy who loves it. I find it fascinating. Whether I've been in a classroom, on a bus, or standing where events actually took place, I've always tried to bring history to life. This happens, I think, when we realise that we are connected to it. History is humanity's story. This is us. The good, the bad, the downright ugly and deplorable. The pursuit of power, the ill-advised, the missteps, as well as all the noble, the remarkable and the inspiring. It is all connected to what we are living today. As we speak, these wars that are going on are threatening global peace and prosperity. These are not isolated, localised issues that sparked in a vacuum. These conflicts are linked to a world order born out of the world wars, which in turn can be traced back to the age of empires and the preceding ancient civilizations that shaped the very ideas of power and security. But rather than linking the US strikes on Iran to Thucydides' trap and dragging you straight back to Athens and Sparta, let's start with something more recent. Welcome to episode 1 of Wayback Look Back. In this first episode, we're looking at the rules-based international system of world order. What is it? How did it come to be? And why it matters? Let's start with the birth of the modern world order. In a nutshell, since the end of World War II in 1945, the world has operated under a system built on internationalism, the belief that cooperation benefits everyone. This system was not an accident or a quick fix. It was constructed methodically. Right now, the world is shifting beneath our very feet. We are facing some of the most interesting and troubling times in human history, but we cannot understand today without understanding yesterday. Most wars, like those happening in Ukraine and the Middle East, are not isolated events. These particular conflicts are symptoms of a deeper breakdown, a challenge to the world order built after 1945. And that world order didn't appear out of thin air. It was constructed, brick by brick, by men and women determined to prevent another global catastrophe. So let's explore how that system came to be, how it has worked, and why it's now in danger. To do this, we have to look back prior to the Second World War ending. In 1941, Britain was essentially standing alone against a European continent that had been overwhelmed and overtaken by Nazi Germany. In August that year, before the US had even joined the war, US President Franklin Roosevelt and UK PM Winston Churchill met secretly off the coast of Newfoundland. Their joint declaration, the Atlantic Charter, laid out principles for a post-war world. In summary, they discussed a post-war world based on a few key principles. There was to be no territorial conquest or expansion. There was to be self-determination for nations who wanted independence. There was to be freedom of the seas and a system of worldwide economic cooperation and trade. It was the theoretical seed of the system we've all lived under and most probably taken for granted. A few years later, in 1944, as the war still raged across Europe and the Pacific, 44 nations met at a mountain resort in New Hampshire's Bretton Woods. For 3 weeks, diplomats and economists, including the great Nobel Prize-winning economist John Maynard Keynes, met to design a stable global economy. They created the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and a system of fixed exchange rates anchored to the US dollar and to gold to stabilise currencies. And they created the World Bank to fund reconstruction and development. They were designing the economic architecture of a new peaceful world. As the war was drawing to a close in 1945, 51 nations met in San Francisco to form the United Nations. That 8-week conference introduced the Security Council, international law, peacekeeping ideals and functions, and a forum for diplomacy. Over the next few years, the UN created specialised agencies and IGOs to manage global cooperation. UNESCO in 1945, the Food and Agriculture Organisation in 1945, the International Labour Organisation in 1946, the World Health Organisation in 1948, and the International Atomic Energy Agency in 1957. These bodies became the machinery of global governance. They were all established so we would work together, collaborate, cooperate. One you've probably never heard of, though, but it is central to the whole idea, is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The GATT was signed by 23 countries in 1947, committing to lowering trade barriers such as tariffs and increasing trade between each other. The logic was simple: peace through prosperity. If nations prosper together, they are less likely to fight. This was the first of 3 foundations for the post-war world system. World order was built on these foundations. 1, peace through prosperity. 2, the rule of law. 3, US leadership. Firstly, let's walk through this idea of peace through prosperity. To do this, let's go back to the GATT. Slowly but surely, more countries joined the agreement. This agreement would lead to the creation of the World Trade Organization. By 1995, it was relaunched with a new name. And when the WTO was established, 128 countries had signed up. The average global tariff had fallen from 22% in 1947 to only 11%, and trade had boomed. By 2020, 164 countries had signed up to the World Trade Organization, and the average global tariff was down to only 4.8%. On the back of the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO, trade exploded and world GDP soared. Extreme poverty collapsed. 60% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty in 1950. By 2010, that percentage was under 10%. Granted, inequality has increased, but that should not take away from what is an unbelievable reduction in global poverty rates. We can do better, and we must, but we can't if we don't have a framework to work together. Free trade, multilateralism, and the rule of law created stability. It became economically irrational to start wars when your prosperity depended on your trading partners. This occurred at a regional level too. After centuries of fighting each other, Western Europe has been at peace since the establishment of the European Economic Communities, which led to the formation of the European Union. It is no coincidence that the member nations of the EU, a community based on trade and economic cooperation, have not fought any wars with each other. Britain and France could not help but fight each other for centuries. Germany and France went to war in 1870 prior to the headline acts that kicked off in 1914 and 1939. They are now political, military, and ideological allies. Similar trade blocs and agreements across the globe have brought nation states together. The African Union, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, to name just a few examples. Shared interests are ensuring cooperation and peace. Peace through prosperity. This has tied our standard of living to peace. No one should want or need to fight a war. The second foundation of world order was the international rule of law. According to the UN, the rule of law is a principle of governance in which all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated, and which are consistent with international human rights, norms, and standards. Such rules and legal enforcement give citizens, businesses, and governments confidence. It is confidence which leads to business, investment, trade, and economic growth. These international norms have reduced the incentives for conquest. These international norms, worldwide expectations, and global pressure have increased the disincentives for conquest. We now live in a world where we talk about human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the most translated document in history. We live in a world where there are well-established rules for the conduct of war. It is in everyone's collective interest to follow them. The UN Charter, the Geneva Conventions, we have the International Court of Justice, international arbitration. Individuals and entire governments have been tried for war crimes. If you play by the rules, you get to be a respected player on the world stage. You benefit from tourism, investment, trade deals. If you don't respect the rule of law, you're shunned. You're deemed a rogue state. You're dangerous. You're a pariah. You're an outcast. You may even be subject to trade sanctions. It is a system of economic carrots and sticks. Amazingly, it's like an international version of treat others how you wish to be treated. The third foundation of the whole system was US leadership. The US underwrote the whole system, militarily, economically, and ideologically. The US is the major financial backer of the UN IGOs such as the IMF and the World Health Organization, as well as NATO, the military alliance that provides security for 32 member nations across North America and Europe. They've also contributed the lion's share of foreign aid and the financing of UN joint operations. This wasn't charity. It was enlightened self-interest. They, along with everyone else, has benefited from the system. But the game only works if everyone plays by the rules. Russia annexing Crimea in 2014 is not following the rules. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is not following the rules. China building up small rocky outcrops and islands in the South China Sea is not following the rules. Israel's actions over the last 3 years especially, well, they are under intense global scrutiny. And perhaps most importantly, the United States, the architect, the chief architect of the system, must follow the rules. When the biggest player on the pitch breaks the rules, the whole game falls apart. This is why Vietnam still haunts US foreign policy. This is why the 2003 invasion of Iraq damaged global trust. Drone strikes in sovereign nations, withdrawal from treaties, tariffs that violate WTO rules, unjustifiable acts of aggression, threats against civilians and civilian infrastructure. When the rule maker breaks the rules, the system fractures. And this is why Iran could be remembered as their greatest strategic blunder. The world looks to them for leadership. Their actions and words matter. The world needs them to lead with a certain moral and legal authority. The whole system is under threat. We're already looking at a connected world in retreat. We are all connected, whether we care to admit it or not. We're all interdependent. Australians drive cars made in Japan and South Korea. North Americans eat more bananas than anyone else, but they are grown in South America. Malaysia supplies China with critical semiconductor components, and the Middle East supplies the world with 30% of its oil. Instead of strengthening this interconnected system, especially by helping developing nations benefit from their comparative advantages and helping each other solve shared problems, the world is retreating into protectionism. Tariffs imposed by the US administration last year were the most high-profile example, but they're part of a broader global trend. Protectionist trade barriers are rising for the first time in decades. The current Middle East conflict is accelerating this shift. Whether we like it or not, the world still runs on oil. And when oil-producing regions are unstable, governments everywhere panic. We are all reliant on a system of trade that requires peace and cooperation. Every government in the world right now will be asking, how do we become self-sufficient so we are not exposed to foreign crises that are not of our making? Malaysia has halted refined petroleum exports to prioritise domestic supply. The UK is using the crisis to push for more homegrown renewable energy. Australia, well, in classic laid-back Aussie style, we just asked everyone to catch the bus instead of driving their cars. But even we are questioning why we closed our oil refineries. The EU is building what they call strategic autonomy. Governments are right to protect their populations. The Netherlands has 3 months' worth of oil stockpiled. China has 4 months of oil in reserve and has halted jet fuel exports. Everyone is preparing for a world where cooperation can no longer be assumed. Crises happen, whether they be economic, political, environmental, and of course military. The question is, do we respond diplomatically and cooperatively, or do we go rogue, act independently out of nothing but self-interest? If nations abandon the rules-based system, we risk a return to global chaos. States will focus solely within their own borders. International relations will slide back into anarchy. Financial markets, trade networks, and commodity flows will collapse and require total reconstruction. Confidence will wane. Cooperation and trust will shrink into regional blocs and rival alliances. Proliferation treaties will be torn up and the arms race will be back on. Zero-sum thinking will reign supreme. Fear and mistrust will rise. We'll be sitting on a powder keg. We've seen this movie before. It was called 1914. Only this time, we have the weapons to wipe ourselves out. George Santayana famously warned that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But here's the twist. We've never seen this before. We've never seen the most powerful nation on earth undermine its own dominance by tearing up the very rule book that it wrote to secure that dominance. The world order built after 2 catastrophic world wars gave us nearly a century of unprecedented peace and prosperity, and we may be watching it unravel. This international rules-based world order is no mean feat. It was a vast undertaking to create it, to foster it, and to maintain it. It required Britain to hand over a vast empire. It needed the US to step up and away from a long history of isolationism. It needed Khrushchev to walk back from nuclear war. It needed Nixon to admit defeat in Vietnam. It has needed the West to allow China and India to rise. And it has called for intervention on some issues and a questionable blind eye on others. It has asked thousands of politicians to speak of strength at home while compromising abroad. And it has required hundreds of thousands of diplomats to work together to grease the wheels of a complex, flawed and fragile system between nations that more often than not have very different perspectives and very different goals. It has been 80 years in the making. It could all be undone in a matter of months. Here's hoping that cooler heads prevail and that they can see the errors of this trajectory and that we retain and build on 80 years of mutually beneficial interconnection and world order. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that today has answered some questions, filled some gaps, and got you thinking. Next time, we go way back to ancient Greece, to Sparta and Athens, and explore why their rivalry still shapes how we think about global politics today. In the meantime, please like, follow, and subscribe, and join me, Gary Wayback, for next month's episode of Wayback Look Back.